Unexpectedly, Emma reached out via email, proposing a brief discussion regarding past events. My immediate reaction was caution, yet I recognized this as a critical test of self-control, moral clarity, and relational fidelity. I responded with measured honesty, affirming boundaries, and prioritizing my current partnership with Leah. This act, though small, symbolized a significant internal milestone: the ability to acknowledge the past without being dominated by it. Leah and I celebrated our achievements and growth with a summer evening by Lake Michigan. We watched sailboats glide across the water, reflected sunlight creating shimmering patterns that seemed to echo the complexity of our journey. In that quiet moment, I recognized that love is not static. It is an evolving practice, sustained through continuous attention, ethical engagement, and conscious effort to navigate both internal impulses and external circumstances. As the summer progressed, I realized that my moral framework, once reactive and defensive, had evolved into one of active awareness, reflection, and intentional choice. I could face temptation without succumbing, process fear without projection, and navigate moral ambiguity without losing relational integrity. Each challenge, each test, each small decision contributed to a growing confidence in my ability to sustain trust, intimacy, and ethical clarity. By the end of Part 8, I understood that relational and personal growth are iterative, expansive, and often uncomfortable. They require confronting shadows of the past, observing present impulses, and consistently choosing actions aligned with integrity, empathy, and commitment. Leah and I had cultivated not merely a romantic partnership, but a framework of shared ethical practice, emotional awareness, and deliberate care that allowed us to navigate life's inevitable turbulence with resilience and clarity. Confronting the past. As summer deepened, the city hummed with heat, energy, and unrelenting motion. The vibrancy of Chicago mirrored the internal turbulence I often felt, a reminder that personal growth, no matter how diligent, is never insulated from external pressures. Leah and I had reached a stage of measured intimacy, characterized by honest communication and deliberate action, but the past remained a presence, subtle, persistent, and occasionally intrusive. It began with a message from Emma, brief and understated. "We need to talk. Important." The simplicity of the words belied the emotional weight I felt upon reading them. My pulse quickened, not with excitement, but with the awareness that unresolved history could resurface at any moment. Leah, informed immediately, responded with calm support. "Whatever happens, we handle it together," she said. The meeting was scheduled for a neutral cafe, quiet and unassuming. Emma arrived, her expression a mixture of apprehension and resolve. The first moments were awkward, a tense interlude where past betrayals and unresolved emotions hung in the air. I listened carefully as she recounted her side of past events, the pressures at work, personal insecurities, and the unintended consequences of her choices. Her honesty was full, devoid of excuses, acknowledging hurt caused without deflecting responsibility. I found myself balancing between residual anger and emerging empathy. The dialogue was moral and emotional minefield, demanding both attentiveness and self-restraint. Rather than reacting impulsively, I observed, questioned, and absorbed. By the end, closure felt partial but significant, a recognition that the past, while impactful, did not dictate the present or future. Returning to Leah, I processed the encounter. We spent hours discussing it, the conversation ranging from emotional responses to moral insights. Leah's presence offered stability, and our dialogue underscored a key realization. Navigating past conflicts requires transparency, empathy, and shared reflection, not avoidance or suppression. Work continued to present both challenge and growth. A new collaboration introduced a colleague, Martin, whose charisma and intellect were undeniable. While our interactions were strictly professional, I noted my internal responses, a mix of curiosity, admiration, and the faint echo of old insecurities. Conscious self-reflection, journaling, and conversations with Leah allowed me to maintain integrity, distinguishing natural human attraction from actions that could compromise trust. The city itself offered lessons. Summer festivals, public art installations, and the bustling lakefront became spaces for observation, reflection, and mindfulness. I noticed small details, the way people navigated crowds, the subtle interactions between strangers, the unspoken social contracts that govern behavior. These observations mirrored my internal efforts, the cultivation of awareness, patience, and deliberate engagement with both people and emotions. One weekend, Leah and I traveled to a coastal town outside Chicago, seeking respite from urban intensity. We explored markets, attended local events, and engaged in conversations that were both intimate and intellectually stimulating. The trip underscored a principle we had gradually embraced. Relationship strength is rooted in mutual respect, ethical awareness, and the ability to confront internal and external challenges collaboratively. Upon returning, social dynamics continued to test me. Leah's professional engagements occasionally included encounters with individuals whose charm or energy could provoke discomfort. Instead of avoidance, I relied on reflection and transparency. Discussing feelings openly with Leah became routine, reinforcing both trust and resilience. Each episode of potential insecurity was reframed as an opportunity for growth, an exercise in ethical decision-making, and reinforcement of relational boundaries. Towards late summer, I received a personal invitation from a former mentor, offering a brief mentorship meeting. The invitation prompted both excitement and caution. I recognized that unexamined nostalgia could cloud judgment, yet careful consideration allowed me to approach the encounter with integrity. I attended, maintaining professional and personal boundaries, observing both the mentor's guidance and my own internal responses. The experience reinforced the importance of conscious engagement over impulsive reaction, particularly when past relationships could influence present choices. By the end of Part 9, I had cultivated a deep understanding of the interplay between past and present, temptation and restraint, vulnerability and integrity. Leah and I had solidified a relational framework grounded in honesty, reflective communication, and shared moral commitment. Each experience, from minor social interactions to emotionally charged encounters with the past, reinforced the principle that sustainable trust and intimacy are constructed incrementally, through conscious attention, ethical awareness, and deliberate choice. Navigating shadows. Late summer had fully settled over Chicago, bringing with it the oppressive heat, the bustling streets, and the relentless pace of life. Leah and I were more attuned to each other now, our conversations marked by honesty, reflection, and a careful balance of personal space and shared intimacy. Yet, despite the apparent stability, the residual echoes of the past continued to ripple beneath the surface, testing my self-control, moral clarity, and relational patience. The encounter with Emma in Part 9 had left a subtle mark. Her brief email, though ostensibly neutral, stirred old insecurities and questions about personal boundaries. I had consciously maintained perspective, but the challenge lay in my continued emotional awareness. I could no longer ignore the lessons. Temptation is not always obvious, trust is never static, and moral decisions are made moment by moment, often under the radar of conscious thought. Work added a new layer of complexity. A high-stakes project brought me into collaboration with Martin and Celia, each a dynamic personality capable of influencing group dynamics. Celia's intensity, Martin's charm, and their professional brilliance triggered faint undercurrents of jealousy and admiration. I began keeping a detailed journal, documenting my emotional responses, subtle internal dialogues, and choices made in the pursuit of ethical consistency. Each entry reinforced the awareness that morality in relationships is exercised not through dramatic declarations, but through countless small decisions. Leah noticed my routine of journaling and asked if it was helping. "It's clarifying," I admitted. "I see my impulses, my triggers, and my patterns. I can respond rather than react." Her hand brushed mine. "That's the point," she said. "Understanding yourself is the foundation for trust. It's not about avoiding mistakes. It's about seeing them before they dictate your actions." Social encounters intensified in late summer. Leah attended several professional events, networking dinners, and social galas. Each event was a subtle test. The presence of colleagues whose energy or attention could provoke latent jealousy, the casual compliments from acquaintances the playful banter that once might have sparked insecurity. I found myself consciously observing my internal responses, practicing mindfulness, and debriefing with Leah afterward. These conversations deepened our bond and reinforced our mutual understanding. Emotional turbulence is not inherently dangerous. How one navigates it is. One weekend, Leah suggested a brief getaway to Lake Geneva. We rented a small lakeside cabin, its wooden walls creaking under the weight of age and weather, and its view overlooking the calm, reflective waters. The weekend offered both respite and opportunity. Time to reflect on past challenges, to explore the subtle layers of our emotional connection, and to confront the lingering shadows of my own insecurities. The first evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun dip behind the tree line, Leah asked, "Do you ever worry that moments like this are fragile? That everything we've built could unravel?" I considered her question. I do, I admitted. But fragility isn't the enemy. It's awareness. It reminds us that we must be conscious in our choices. She nodded, her fingers interlacing with mine. Exactly. And being aware together makes it less daunting. Throughout the weekend, we alternated between silence, conversation, and laughter. We revisited moments from the past months, professional tensions, encounters with people from our respective circles, and instances where emotional impulses had threatened to skew judgment. Each discussion was layered, reflecting not only the events themselves, but also the ethical and emotional decisions we had made in response. By unpacking these situations, we were constructing a shared framework for resilience, one built on reflection, communication, and mutual accountability. Returning to Chicago, the city's rhythms felt simultaneously familiar and nuanced. I recognized subtle patterns in my behavior, the tendency to overanalyze social interactions, the reflexive caution in professional collaboration, and the deliberate effort required to maintain relational integrity. Leah and I maintained an ongoing dialogue, sharing insights and reaffirming boundaries without judgment or resentment. These practices became the backbone of our relationship, transforming ordinary experiences into opportunities for growth. Unexpectedly, an acquaintance from my past, a former friend whose presence once contributed to relational tension, reached out for collaboration on a minor project. My initial reaction was apprehension, a blend of curiosity, latent defensiveness, and mild irritation. I reflected on these impulses, analyzing both their source and relevance to present circumstances. Choosing transparency, I informed Leah and discussed potential challenges, ensuring alignment and trust before proceeding. Each such decision reinforced the principle that relational integrity is cultivated through deliberate action, awareness, and ethical engagement. Even leisure activities became arenas for subtle moral and emotional tests. Leah and I attended gallery openings, local theater performances, and community events. Observing interactions between strangers, colleagues, and friends allowed me to mirror internal processes. How perception can color reality, how admiration or attraction can arise without compromising fidelity, and how conscious reflection transforms potential vulnerability into insight. By mid-September, the cumulative lessons of the past year had become evident. The internal frameworks I had constructed, awareness of triggers, journaling, therapy insights, and open dialogue with Leah, provided a resilient foundation. Challenges no longer incited impulsive responses. Instead, they became opportunities for deliberate choice, ethical navigation, and shared reflection. Late one evening, walking along the lakeshore near our apartment, Leah asked, "Do you think we've learned enough to handle anything the next year throws at us?" I smiled, watching the gentle ripple of water under streetlights. "It's not about knowing enough," I said. "It's about being conscious enough to face what comes, together and individually. That awareness is what counts." She rested her head on my shoulder, and in that shared silence, I realized how far we had come. The city around us, its lights, streets, and river, reflected not only our external environment, but also the internal landscapes we had navigated. Every professional encounter, social interaction, and moment of personal reflection had contributed to a richer understanding of ourselves and each other. Our relationship, though strengthened, remained dynamic, responsive to new challenges, and continuously shaped by ethical and emotional choices. Temptations, professional tensions, and past relationships were no longer threats, but instruments for growth. Each moment demanded mindfulness, courage, and integrity, reinforcing the foundations of trust and intimacy that Leah and I had deliberately cultivated. By the end of this expanded Part 10, the narrative had shifted from mere resolution to ongoing development. Growth is iterative, relational stability is cultivated, and moral clarity is exercised continuously. Leah and I had constructed a partnership resilient enough to endure complexity, nuanced enough to accommodate imperfection, and ethically grounded enough to sustain trust over time. Unforeseen challenges. As autumn deepened in Chicago, the city's skyline transformed into a mosaic of amber, gold, and rust. The river reflected the shifting light, and the subtle chill in the air reminded me that change was inevitable, both in the environment and within ourselves. Leah and I had grown together, yet life had a way of introducing unforeseen challenges that tested even the strongest foundations. Work brought a new level of intensity. I was assigned to lead a cross-departmental project, which required constant coordination with colleagues, some of whom had reputations for being unpredictable and, at times, manipulative. Among them was Vanessa, whose intellect and persuasive charm were both impressive and potentially destabilizing for someone like me, attuned to internal emotional cues and relational integrity. I felt the familiar spark of curiosity and admiration, but I also recognized the danger. A subtle shift in attention or emotional investment could compromise not only my professional performance, but the trust one had cultivated with Leah. Leah noticed my pensive mood after the first week of the project. Over dinner one evening, she asked gently, "You seem tense. Something happened at work?" I considered how much to reveal and chose transparency. Vanessa is brilliant, but I catch myself analyzing our interactions more than is necessary. It's not about her. It's about how I respond. I want to ensure I maintain clarity and integrity. She nodded, a mixture of concern and reassurance in her expression. Awareness is key. You've managed so much already. This is just another layer. Talk to me, and we'll work through it together. Communication had become our safeguard, a consistent practice to process internal reactions before they could affect the relationship. Leah and I began a routine of evening reflections, discussing moments of tension, triggers observed during the day, and strategies to maintain composure and ethical clarity. Each conversation reinforced the trust between us and reminded me that relational resilience is built through conscious effort, not simply circumstance. Meanwhile, the city itself became a silent teacher. Walking through the vibrant autumn streets, watching families navigate crowded sidewalks, observing fleeting interactions between strangers, I began to notice how subtle cues, a glance, a gesture, a word, could trigger emotions, biases, or assumptions. These observations became a mirror for my own internal processes, how easily perceptions could distort reality and how deliberate reflection could recalibrate both judgment and response. Leah's career was also demanding attention. She was overseeing a major campaign with tight deadlines and high stakes. Her own exposure to colleagues with charisma, influence, and unpredictability prompted discussions about boundaries, ethics, and professional respect. Together, we explored scenarios, discussed potential emotional responses, and practiced proactive strategies to maintain trust and clarity. These exercises were subtle but powerful. They reinforced the principle that moral and relational growth is iterative and requires continuous attention. The weekend brought a brief respite. We traveled to a small cabin on the outskirts of Lake County, surrounded by forests where the leaves created a kaleidoscope of color under the pale autumn sun. The cabin offered both physical and psychological space, a retreat to reflect, observe, and process the subtle tensions of the past weeks. We spent mornings hiking, observing the rhythm of nature, and noting how even in seemingly chaotic systems, balance emerges through continuous adjustment. The analogy was clear. Relationships, like ecosystems, require attention, adaptation, and awareness. Evenings were devoted to deeper reflection. Leah and I would sit by the fireplace, discussing moments of the past weeks where our awareness had prevented potential conflict, where internal temptations were recognized and consciously managed. The act of articulating these moments aloud created a shared narrative of growth, consolidating lessons, and reinforcing our commitment to one another. Unexpectedly, Emma's presence surfaced again in professional correspondence, though in a non-personal capacity. The reminder of past entanglements could have destabilized me, but the layered practices we had built, reflection, dialogue, journaling, mindfulness, allowed me to engage without reactivating old patterns. I responded with professional courtesy, setting boundaries and maintaining ethical clarity. Leah, informed as always, reinforced the importance of transparency and mutual respect. As the weekend ended and we returned to the city, I noticed a subtle but important shift, a confidence not rooted in arrogance but in disciplined awareness. I recognized my capacity to navigate complex social and emotional landscapes without compromising integrity. Each professional challenge, each encounter with temptation or tension, had become a controlled opportunity for reflection and growth. By mid-November, Chicago had donned its early winter coat. Frost lined the rooftops and streets, and the early evening brought a sharp bite to the air. Leah and I, armed with months of experience in conscious relational practice, continued to navigate subtle complexities, moments of envy, professional temptation, and the echoes of past relationships, with deliberate attention. The foundation we had built was no longer merely protective, it was generative, fostering deeper connection, moral clarity, and emotional insight. In these months, I realized that growth is not linear. Challenges arrive unpredictably, temptation can arise subtly, and the past may resurface when least expected. Yet, by cultivating awareness, practicing transparency, and engaging in continuous dialogue, Leah and I had established a dynamic equilibrium, a system of trust and resilience capable of withstanding the fluctuations of both internal and external pressures. Reflections and subtle tests. As November progressed, the city's streets were layered with frost and the first fallen leaves of late autumn. Chicago seemed quieter in the early mornings, the air crisp, yet there was an underlying energy, a pulse in the city that mirrored the constant motion of our own lives. Leah and I had reached a new equilibrium. Our communication had deepened, our shared ethical framework had solidified, yet subtle tests continued to emerge, probing the resilience of our relationship and the clarity of our moral compass. Work remained intense. A new collaborative project brought in an external consultant, Jordan, whose innovative ideas and confident presence immediately drew attention within the office. I noticed a flicker of internal tension, not due to any misconduct, but the subtle awareness that admiration could transform into distraction if unexamined. I journaled my reactions, noting the emotional triggers and the strategies I used to maintain focus and professional boundaries. Leah's own schedule was equally demanding, with end-of-year deliverables requiring her attention. Our routines were often segmented, mornings dedicated to independent work, evenings reserved for discussion and reflection. These conversations became increasingly nuanced, covering not only events but also emotional responses, latent insecurities, and ethical dilemmas. We discussed what it meant to truly act with integrity when confronted by temptation or emotional provocation. One particular evening, as we walked along the river walk, Leah asked, "Do you think we're ever completely immune to the past, to doubt, or to temptation?" I considered this carefully. "No," I replied. "Awareness and choice are what matter. We're never immune, but we can respond deliberately rather than react unconsciously." The clarity of that exchange reinforced our mutual understanding. Emotional intelligence, we realized, was not about eliminating feelings, but about observing them without losing control. Each subtle test, whether at work or in social settings, became an opportunity to reinforce our relational framework. A brief midweek trip to a nearby suburban town provided a space for deeper reflection. The small town's quiet streets and modest cafes offered contrast to the city's incessant activity. We spent hours walking through local parks, discussing interpersonal dynamics, and reflecting on moments when our choices could have compromised trust but were consciously managed instead. Leah and I documented these discussions in a shared journal, a practice that allowed us to revisit our decisions and recognize patterns of growth. Unexpected social encounters continued to present challenges. A former college acquaintance, David, reached out, expressing interest in rekindling friendship. My initial reaction was a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Engaging in the interaction required careful thought, balancing professional and personal boundaries, acknowledging past connections, and ensuring that emotional attention remained aligned with current commitments. Leah's input was invaluable. She provided perspective and suggested strategies to maintain clarity and transparency. Professional responsibilities also intensified with the upcoming end-of-year review. I had to manage expectations, navigate office politics, and deliver results under pressure. Each interaction with colleagues offered micro-tests of character, moments when impatience, jealousy, or temptation could arise. By consciously observing these impulses and choosing responses aligned with integrity, I was able to convert potential stressors into opportunities for growth. Leah and I debriefed daily, sharing insights and reinforcing our mutual commitment to ethical action. Late November brought social gatherings, both personal and professional. Leah's holiday event with colleagues required engagement with individuals whose charm and influence could provoke subtle insecurities. I remained vigilant, consciously practicing mindfulness and emotional restraint. After each gathering, Leah and I discussed observations, responses, and internal reactions, using these exchanges to strengthen relational resilience. Amidst these challenges, we found time for shared creative projects, cooking new recipes, exploring local art exhibits, and experimenting with photography. These activities, while seemingly mundane, became avenues for subtle emotional and moral growth. Each creative exercise offered opportunities for collaboration, empathy, and communication, reinforcing trust through shared experience rather than explicit dialogue. By the end of Part 12, the lessons of the past months had crystallized. Awareness, reflection, deliberate choice, and open communication were the pillars sustaining our relationship. Each subtle test, whether professional, social, or internal, reinforced our capacity to act with integrity, navigate temptation, and cultivate resilience. Leah and I had moved beyond survival or reaction. We were actively shaping a partnership capable of enduring the complexities and uncertainties of life and the emotional landscapes that accompanied them. Echoes of the past. As December approached, Chicago's winter fully asserted itself. Frosted rooftops, icy sidewalks, and the intermittent glint of sunlight on river surfaces created both beauty and hazard. Leah and I had adapted to the seasonal rhythms, but the intensification of cold and shorter days mirrored subtle emotional pressures, inviting introspection, reflection, and occasional unease. The months of conscious relational work had built a foundation, yet echoes of the past still surfaced in unpredictable ways, reminding me that vigilance and awareness were ongoing necessities. Work brought an unexpected challenge. A former colleague, Elise, whose past interactions had been emotionally charged and morally ambiguous, returned as part of a temporary consultancy team. Her presence immediately triggered nuanced responses, lingering curiosity, recollection of prior ethical dilemmas, and subtle self-doubt about how I might navigate interactions without compromising integrity. I recognized that the past was not merely a series of events, but a reservoir of emotional patterns and latent vulnerabilities. Engaging with Elise required deliberate reflection, transparency with Leah, and careful management of boundaries. Leah noticed my contemplative demeanor during dinner one evening. "Something's on your mind," she observed. "Do you want to talk about it?" I described the situation with Elise and my internal responses, emphasizing my intent to maintain professional and ethical clarity. Leah's calm, reasoned feedback was invaluable. "Awareness, reflection, and transparency," she reminded me. "Those aren't just words, they're actions. You know what to do." This affirmation reinforced the guiding principle of our relationship. Navigating both internal and external pressures requires conscious attention, ethical decision-making, and collaborative dialogue. Each instance of temptation, insecurity, or uncertainty became an opportunity to apply these principles in real time. Socially, December was marked by gatherings, holiday events, and increased interactions with colleagues and acquaintances. Leah and I found that each engagement, whether casual or formal, carried micro-tests of relational resilience. Compliments, proximity, and professional charm could provoke fleeting discomfort or curiosity. Our strategy involved deliberate observation of emotional responses, journaling insights, and post-event discussions to evaluate actions, thoughts, and ethical choices. These exercises, though subtle, reinforced relational strength and moral clarity. Amid professional and social pressures, we carved time for shared personal projects. The cabin visits we had cultivated during autumn continued, now adapted for winter. Cozy fireplaces, hot beverages, and long hours of conversation became rituals of reflection. In these spaces, we discussed not only external events but also internal processes, examining patterns of jealousy, temptation, and ethical decision-making. Each conversation deepened our understanding of one another and strengthened relational trust. Unexpectedly, an old acquaintance from college, Liam, contacted me regarding a collaborative endeavor in community outreach. While the engagement was professional, I noticed subtle internal reactions: curiosity, nostalgia, and ethical evaluation. Leah and I again processed the potential emotional and relational impact, reaffirming boundaries and strategies for maintaining clarity and focus. The practice of joint reflection and transparency continued to be a stabilizing force. Professional dynamics remained intricate. Managing team collaboration, deadlines, and interpersonal politics required a careful balance of assertiveness, empathy, and vigilance. Moments of subtle temptation, admiration for colleagues' charisma, opportunities for social proximity, or playful banter were consciously acknowledged and managed. Each choice reinforced the principle that ethical behavior is maintained through awareness, reflection, and deliberate action, not through avoidance or suppression of emotional responses. As the winter solstice approached, Leah and I took a reflective walk along the lakefront at dusk. The river reflected city lights, shimmering like distant stars, and the cold air carried a crisp clarity. We discussed the year's events, successes, challenges, emotional tests, and moments of moral ambiguity. This exercise in reflection underscored the iterative nature of growth. Resilience, trust, and integrity are cultivated gradually through repeated conscious practice and attentive engagement with both self and partner. Late December brought a culmination of social, professional, and emotional complexities. Holiday gatherings with colleagues, family obligations, and unanticipated encounters with people from our past created a dense web of interactions requiring vigilance and deliberate ethical engagement. Leah and I navigated each situation collaboratively, debriefing after events, analyzing responses, and reinforcing boundaries. By the end of Part 13, the lessons of the past year had become increasingly evident. Growth is incremental, relational integrity is actively maintained, and ethical clarity is cultivated through reflection, awareness, and communication. Leah and I had transformed potential challenges into opportunities for insight and connection, and the foundation of our partnership had evolved to accommodate complexity, ambiguity, and the inevitable fluctuations of human emotion. Winter's reflection. The city had fully embraced winter. Snow dusted the streets, sidewalks glistened with ice, and the river, partially frozen, reflected the muted light of short December days. Leah and I had settled into a rhythm that balanced professional obligations, personal growth, and relational mindfulness. The practices we had established, nightly reflections, journaling, and open dialogue, provided a framework for navigating both external challenges and the subtle emotional undercurrents that arose daily. Work continued to challenge our capacity for ethical clarity. A complex project involving multiple stakeholders required intricate negotiation, collaboration, and conflict resolution. Among the team was Claire, a colleague whose incisive intellect and confident manner could provoke admiration and subtle envy in others. I recognized the importance of consciously managing my emotional responses, observing internal triggers without judgment, and maintaining focus on professional goals. Leah's presence and our post-work reflections reinforced the discipline required to navigate these dynamics. One evening, as we shared a quiet dinner at home, Leah asked, "Do you ever feel that some of these challenges are like small mirrors, reflecting parts of yourself you haven't fully understood?" I nodded thoughtfully. Yes, they're subtle tests of both self-awareness and relational integrity. Each interaction, each temptation or frustration, is an opportunity to observe and respond deliberately rather than react unconsciously. Our winter routines also included more intentional creative collaborations. We explored photography along snowy streets, capturing light reflections on ice and the delicate patterns of frost on windows. Cooking together became an exercise not just in sustenance, but in patience, communication, and shared enjoyment. These mundane activities became arenas for moral and emotional practice, reinforcing trust and highlighting the subtle nuances of collaboration and mutual respect. Social engagements during the holidays introduced additional complexity. Leah attended a series of professional gatherings, each populated by influential figures whose charm and presence could have triggered insecurity or distraction. I approached these events with a deliberate mindset, observing reactions, journaling emotional responses, and engaging in reflective debriefs with Leah afterward. Each interaction reinforced our shared understanding that vigilance, transparency, and conscious engagement are essential to sustaining trust. Unexpectedly, a former mentor contacted me regarding a professional opportunity. While the engagement was non-romantic and strictly career-oriented, the correspondence evoked nostalgia and mild self-doubt. Leah and I discussed boundaries and strategies for maintaining clarity, and we agreed on principles of transparency and joint reflection. This approach minimized the potential for misunderstanding or emotional distraction, turning what could have been a source of tension into an opportunity for ethical practice. Late winter weekends offered a chance for retreats outside the city. A trip to a small town in northern Illinois provided quiet reflection and observation. We hiked forested trails, observed wildlife, and noted the patterns of human interaction in small community settings. These observations became a lens for understanding subtle relational dynamics, personal responses to social stimuli, and the iterative process of emotional regulation. Leah and I used these trips to articulate reflections, analyze relational choices, and reinforce mutual commitments. Professional pressures continued to test patience and ethical awareness. A colleague, Raphael, demonstrated behavior that required careful navigation, charm interwoven with subtle manipulations. Recognizing the potential for ethical compromise, I engaged in active reflection, maintained transparency with Leah, and consciously practiced assertive communication. Each moment of subtle ethical challenge reinforced the principles we had cultivated: awareness, reflection, deliberate choice, and open dialogue. As December drew to a close, we spent evenings walking along the riverfront, observing city lights reflecting on icy surfaces, and discussing the cumulative lessons of the past year. Each challenge, whether social, professional, or emotional, had become an opportunity to strengthen awareness, resilience, and relational trust. Leah and I had cultivated a relational ecosystem capable of sustaining complexity, uncertainty, and the subtle pressures of daily life. By the end of Part 14, the interplay of external pressures and internal awareness had solidified into a coherent framework for sustained growth. The partnership between Leah and me was not static. It remained dynamic, responsive, and ethical, capable of enduring both subtle and overt challenges with integrity and conscious attention. Crossroads and decisions. January brought with it the stark clarity of midwinter. The city, blanketed in snow, reflected both beauty and isolation, and the shortened daylight hours seemed to magnify the subtle tensions and emotional currents that had quietly developed over the past months. Leah and I were deeply engaged in our respective professional lives, yet the shared routines of reflection, journaling, and communication continued to anchor our relationship, providing both stability and insight. Work intensified unexpectedly. I was tasked with leading a high-profile initiative involving multiple departments and tight deadlines. The project required constant negotiation, coordination, and ethical vigilance. Among the team was Sophia, whose intellect and confident presence had the potential to inspire admiration, but also risked drawing attention away from my commitment to Leah. Recognizing this, I documented my internal reactions, analyzed emotional triggers, and engaged in mindful reflection to maintain both professional integrity and personal clarity. Leah noticed my introspective mood during dinner one evening. "You seem preoccupied," she observed. "Are you handling everything okay?" I shared the situation, including the subtle emotional responses that emerged while interacting with Sophia. Leah's calm reassurance was invaluable. "Awareness and reflection are your tools," she said. "You've handled challenges before. This is just another layer. Transparency with yourself and with me keeps us grounded." This conversation highlighted an essential principle we had developed. Relational integrity is maintained through continuous awareness and deliberate choice, particularly when confronted with potential temptations or subtle emotional provocations. Each micro-decision, from professional conduct to emotional response, reinforced our shared commitment and ethical foundation. The weekend offered an opportunity to recalibrate. We traveled to a lakeside cabin farther north, where the snow-laden forests and frozen waters provided a sense of stillness and clarity. Long walks along trails allowed us to discuss recent events, evaluate emotional patterns, and explore scenarios that could challenge relational and ethical stability. The cabin became a laboratory for reflection, reinforcing both personal and relational growth. Social interactions, even in this isolated setting, provided subtle tests. We encountered other cabin residents, fellow hikers, and locals at small cafes, each interaction presenting opportunities to observe our internal responses, biases, and communication styles. Leah and I consciously articulated reflections on these experiences, identifying moments of effective emotional regulation and areas for continued attention. Unexpectedly, an old acquaintance from college reached out via social media, initiating a conversation that could have easily stirred curiosity and nostalgia. I engaged with careful consideration, analyzing emotional responses and ensuring alignment with current relational priorities. Leah was informed promptly, and together we reflected on the engagement, reinforcing boundaries and reaffirming our shared ethical framework. Professional pressures persisted. Coordinating across departments required negotiation, conflict resolution, and constant vigilance against subtle manipulations or misinterpretations. By maintaining transparency, reflecting on personal responses, and discussing challenges with Leah, I was able to navigate these dynamics while preserving relational and ethical integrity. Even leisure activities were approached with conscious engagement. Photography sessions along snowy streets, experimental cooking, and shared creative projects provided avenues for collaboration, patience, and empathy. Each activity, while seemingly ordinary, became a practical exercise in communication, trust, and mutual respect. Late January evenings were often spent walking along the frozen riverfront, discussing the interplay between external pressures and internal awareness. We observed city lights reflected on icy surfaces, the muted sounds of traffic, and the quiet resilience of the urban environment. These observations became metaphors for our relational journey. Balance is maintained not through the absence of challenge, but through ongoing attention, adaptation, and deliberate action. By the conclusion of Part 15, Leah and I had further solidified the relational ecosystem we were cultivating. Awareness, reflection, and deliberate choice remained central to navigating professional, social, and personal complexities. Each challenge, whether external or internal, reinforced the iterative process of growth, demonstrating that relational integrity and emotional resilience are developed through continuous, conscious engagement. Convergence and continuity. February arrived with a pale, reflective sunlight casting long shadows over the city. Chicago's winter was nearing its end, and with it came a sense of transition, subtle, steady, and inevitable. Leah and I had navigated nearly a year of professional, social, and emotional challenges, emerging with deeper awareness, trust, and a mutual ethical framework that had guided us through each test and temptation. The culmination of our journey was not marked by a single event, but by the convergence of countless micro-decisions, reflective practices, and collaborative growth. Each professional encounter, social interaction, and personal reflection had contributed to the solidification of our partnership. Moments that once might have triggered insecurity or doubt were now managed with conscious attention, mindful observation, and deliberate choice. A significant professional milestone arrived in early February. I successfully concluded a complex project that had tested my leadership, ethical judgment, and emotional resilience. The recognition was not merely external. The internal sense of accomplishment derived from adhering to principles of integrity and conscious decision-making was profound. Leah, having supported and engaged in reflective discussions throughout, shared in this success with the understanding that our growth was collective, not merely individual. Socially, we engaged with colleagues, friends, and community members with renewed clarity. Interactions that could have previously provoked jealousy, temptation, or insecurity were approached with mindfulness, open communication, and ethical foresight. The framework we had built allowed for both intimacy and independence, demonstrating that trust is both a dynamic process and a shared responsibility. Leisure and creative activities remained central. Our photography projects captured the subtle transformations of late winter, frost on windows, ice patterns along the river, and the pale light of early sunsets. Cooking experiments, walks, and reflective conversations became both rituals and exercises in collaboration, patience, and empathy. Each shared moment reinforced relational cohesion and provided opportunities for further growth and introspection. One evening, as we walked along the riverfront, Leah asked quietly, "Do you feel we've reached a point where trust and understanding are unshakable?" I paused, considering not just the present but the journey that had led us here. "Trust is never absolute," I said. "It's a living practice, reinforced in each choice, each reflection, each conversation. But we've built a foundation strong enough to withstand doubt and temptation. That is what matters." The city's lights reflected on the icy river, shimmering like distant constellations, mirroring the subtle, continuous evolution of our relationship. We recognized that growth, resilience, and ethical clarity are iterative, requiring sustained awareness, communication, and deliberate action. There was no dramatic resolution or singular climax, only the quiet convergence of understanding, trust, and shared commitment. In private moments, we reflected on lessons learned. Emotional triggers are neither eliminated nor ignored. Temptation and doubt are navigated through conscious choice, and the past is acknowledged without allowing it to compromise the present. Each insight became a cornerstone of relational strength and moral clarity. As February deepened, Leah and I continued to engage with life's complexities with deliberate attention. Professional challenges, social dynamics, and personal growth were approached with awareness, transparency, and ethical mindfulness. The partnership we had cultivated was dynamic, resilient, and adaptive, capable of accommodating both subtle and overt pressures without sacrificing integrity or intimacy. The story did not end with perfection or closure, but with a clear understanding. Relationships, trust, and moral growth are ongoing processes. Each choice, reflection, and conversation contributes to a continuous journey, reinforcing the capacity to navigate life's unpredictability together. In the quiet reflection of a winter evening, Leah rested her head on my shoulder. The city, the river, and the experiences we had shared converged into a shared understanding. Love, trust, and ethical clarity are not static endpoints, but living practices, continually reinforced through awareness, dialogue, and shared commitment.